Hey, welcome to Dan's Model Works, and we're back working on our corporate flyers. That is the Dassault Falcon10 by Hasegawa and the Lockheed Vega by AMT. I haven't worked on these things in at least 3.5 weeks. Nothing has been done to them. They've just been laying here gathering dust. Now, what you didn't see, seem to be missing something here. Just as I was finishing spraying my white primer on the Falcon here, the hook that I had going into the landing gear bay let go and it fell down, thud, which fractured this seam and knocked off our tail plane. So that has to be addressed before we can do anything else. But otherwise, there's not a whole lot of work to be done on the Falcon in that a nice coat of gloss white paint. We're probably getting close to decals. I am going out in the next 20 minutes or so, running Natasha over to her friend's house, and I will be picking up some yellow paint to start the arduous task of painting the Vega yellow. I'm also going to have to pick up a red, hopefully that looks like the shell red, and that's what our next step is going to be here. So I'm basically going to be painting this whole thing yellow, and then I will be masking the scallops on the side so that I can do the red here and into the belly. And I'm 90% sure that we're going to have to be touching up the red on the wing leading edges because the decals are not likely to come together perfectly there. So I used Tamiya TS16 yellow spray, and it looks awfully bright to me, but every time I look at a shell logo and I ignore the red, the yellow does look quite bright. I was toying with the idea of turning around and spraying it with I've got some Caterpillar Old Yellow here. That's actually not that much darker. You know what? I think I'm going to hit this with some Caterpillar Old Yellow. And that's just going to deepen it up a little bit. Well, for better or for worse, I did use the darker yellow paint. Basically, it's Old Caterpillar Yellow. And I think it was the right decision. The only thing is it's a rust paint, and I've had it for some years. And it actually took quite heavy coats in order to get a good solid coat of color on there. But I think it'll be fine. So it's time to prep the fuselage and the wings for the red paint, because unfortunately the decal sheet does give us the front, basically the leading edge of the wings and the horizontal stabilizers and the vertical tail surface. It gives us those and all the markings. What it does not give us is this scallop here. And of course, the cowling has to be painted red, and most frustrating, they don't give us decals for our wheel spats. I haven't determined how I'm going to do the wheel spats yet, whether I'm going to airbrush this red or whether I'm just simply going to brush paint it. I haven't decided that yet. No matter what, I probably will be doing some sort of masking on there. But if I simply brush paint the red on, it will be easier because I'm not worrying about screwing up all my strut work there. So to start, and I should bring up, if we look at the scallop, it's a compound curve. You've got a fairly tight curve here, and then you have a much gentler curve down here. So to start, I have cut a circle of masking tape using my least favorite tool in the world, the Olfa circle cutter. So that gives me my upper part of my curve, and then I've cut a larger, let's turn the camera here, a larger circle down here for the lower part of the scallop. So there is my smaller circle, And then I've used a larger circle. I'm not sure if it shows, but basically the original circle, its diameter takes us to here. And this is the larger one. And I've made sure that it blended smoothly here and that it's going farther down. Now, really, I should be doing this with a French curve or something like that, but that's not going to happen. But what I want to make sure is when I put my circle on the other side that I end up with approximately the same distance here to here. Now, I can't give you any measurements as to what diameter these circles were, because I basically used the Mark I eyeball. Just basically, yeah, it looks about right. So that's all the help I can give you is just. But the main thing is when you're cutting the smaller circles for the upper part of your scallop, cut 2. When you're doing the lower, cut 2. So that way you've got the same radius for both of those. So looking on our instructions, you can see there's 2 fairings on the bottom of the aircraft. You've got the larger oval here and then the smaller one, and the landing legs attached to those. So the scallop appears to just come to a point right in front of the smaller rear one. So I'm going to run a piece of Tamiya masking tape basically from that point forward, and I'm going to introduce hopefully a flowing curve to it. Let's see how that turns out. So there's our masking for the bottom of the scallop. So basically this oval here at the front, it's going to be red. This is going to be yellow. So the last thing that has to be precision masked is the back of the windows and kind of around the windows, because all that framing should be red. Then the rest of this is basically just going to be masking, just covering everything up with tape, because really it's only this scallop and the framing around the window that's got to be red. The rest of it can stay yellow because we have decals for it. Now I'm sure I'm going to have to touch up said decals, but this is the biggest part that they don't give you. So it's next day and I'm ready to do my red paint. And yes, the whole thing is covered over with masking tape except for our crescent that's got to be painted on here. Now, one thing I did that I've never done before, I'm giving it a try, is before I'm actually going to paint the red on, I actually gave it a shot of Tamiya dull coat. And the reason I did that was hopefully it will seal up any areas that the red paint might want to sneak under. Because sometimes there's nothing worse than getting everything all masked and everything like that, and you spray it, and then you get that little line that runs underneath. So I'm seeing if this will prevent that from happening. So this is going to be sprayed, okay, and the stripes on the landing gear, I'm going to brush paint those, and the reason is I don't want to paint these struts red. I want those to stay yellow. They're supposed to be yellow, and I think it's going to be a royal pain in the ass to do that. So I'm just going to brush paint this. Now hopefully that will turn out all right. Now as for color, here's the decal sheet. And make sure we're focusing here. This one is Tester's dark red. The next one is Tester's red. And this one is Tamiya red. And I think the first one is the closest color. And that's the thing is, I'm going to have to touch up around these decals where they meet on the front, on the leading edges of the wings and things like that. I think Right On Replica has mentioned this in his build, that your decals aren't going to meet up everywhere perfectly, so you want something that's pretty darn close. Plus, this is the paint I'm going to be using, on our crescent here and on the cowling. So I want that to be as close as possible. So I'm hoping that will be all right. So my red is pretty much dry. Let's get all this masking tape off. So to fix this, what I'm going to do is just lightly sand it. And there as well. And then I'm going to respray it, but I'm basically going to respray it through a very small hole that's just a little bit bigger than our oopsie. Because if you mask it, you're going to end up with a hard edge, and we don't want that. I'm just about to start putting on the decals. I'm going to start with something really small. I've basically one of the logos right there. I'm going to see how well that lays down, and I'm just going to make sure that my setting solution doesn't, set it on fire or reduce it to a blob of wrinkles. That happened to me once before with an AMT decal, and obviously I don't want to put a big stripe on and have it just go totally awry. The decals are finally on, and I really didn't film a whole lot of it, although if you watched the previous video in which I was showing the project from the past, the Coke truck, you'll know that one of the problems I was having with these AMT decals is basically they were not really reacting that well to decal setting solution. At least they weren't wrinkling up and being unusable. But what was happening, of course, was you'd put it on and they would chuckle softly and they wouldn't soften up, they wouldn't bed down, they wouldn't do anything, they'd just sit there. I did purchase a new bottle of Micro Sol, as well as a fresh bottle of Solvacet, and they seem to react a little bit better to those. So, but putting the decals on took way longer than I anticipated. Not in terms that it took me a long time to physically put them on, but I would put one on and then wait 24 hours and I'd put another one on. So the wind had kind of gone out of my sails here. So we're just going to set this one aside for now, because there is another part to this project, obviously. We have the Dassault Falcon, and as you can see, I've got masking tape on the wings and the tail surfaces. These areas, according to the instructions, should be a silver gray color, and I'm going to use Tester's aluminum because that's kind of a dullish silver color, not very vibrant, and that's what I figure that these should be. You can see I still have various stuffing in here because I still might be doing some spraying. And before I attempt the decals, you may recall that in the initial look at these two kits, that these decals were water damaged. So they look like they're still intact. I'm going to give these a coat of microscale liquid decal film. There we are. Just to make sure that the film isn't going to break up on me or anything like that. Fortunately, I don't really like to worry about these stars and these red circles. I'm assuming they're for a Japanese paint scheme. But what I really want is the stripes. Those are the decals that I want to survive. So hopefully we can save most of them. Okay, I've got my silver gray on my wing leading edges, and I'm just getting ready to put the first decal on. Now this isn't the first decal I used. First one was actually the instrument panel. It went on fine. So I'm hoping that the rest of them don't give me any problems. There's our first decal on, and it took quite a while to separate from the backing. As a matter of fact, as I tried to jar it loose, it kind of broke in a couple places, so I'm going to let them sit quite a bit longer before trying to remove them from the backing. We're talking several minutes here. So I've got the stripes on one side, with the exception of the engine pod. And yeah, they're breaking apart all over the place, but at least they're being polite as they do it. I have dealt with worse decals. I'm just going to be starting to put some setting solution on, just to get them on there a little more permanently. So I'm returning my attention to the Vega here, so I realize there's a bunch I didn't film. I didn't film the taking the masking off of the windows, but I had to touch up a little bit of the framing anyway with red. But I'm getting ready to... This water heater just clicked off. No, now it's trying to come back on again. This will be the third time I call to have them check on the water heater. It's not mine, it's their problem. It's like sometimes it works fine and sometimes it leaves us high and dry without any water. Or hot water, rather. Right now it's annoying me because it's on while I'm filming. The vent pipe is hot, so it's obviously the burners come on. Anyway, back to modeling here. So, I'm about ready to glue the main landing gear on, and what I've done is I've reamed out all the holes slightly so that I'm not having to put a ton of force in to get the pegs in. And I've cleaned up the pegs as much as I can without snapping anything off. So you probably can't tell. I certainly really only confirmed it when I sat it down, but this landing gear here is down lower. So my glue hasn't set up yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop that one off and I'm going to fiddle with this mount right here and I'll see if I can pivot this up a little bit more. As you can probably see, I've got all the decals on and they were the exact opposite of the ones on the AMT kit. These ones were extremely fragile, and yes, I really did paint on some liquid decal film to make sure that they were saved. So, because every time you tell somebody on YouTube that the decal broke apart, inevitably people are like, did you put some? Yes, I did. I put some on it. I put lots on it. At any rate, at least these decals, when you put them on, they conformed nicely to the fuselage and the details and everything, but they were super, super fragile. The stripes, and they were originally in 2 or 3 pieces anyway, they broke all over the place. The very nose had a damaged area anyway, and I just figured, you know what? That chipped off of the real plane. I still have to take the masking off the windows. Before I do that, I'm going to just do the chrome lip on the engines here. And it's just going to be fine. Hopefully I can do it freehand without totally bodging it. So hopefully to correct the height of my landing gear, because basically the right-hand landing gear was a little tall, I'm going to remove just a tiny bit of the fuselage at the top of the hole here, and the peg I'm going to remove a little bit of the top, and that will ensure that the whole thing ends up being, you know, maybe a millimeter, hopefully maybe 2 millimeters higher up on the fuselage, and that should take care, he says, should take care of our lopsidedness. We'll have to see. So I now have both landing gear, main landing gear, glued on, and I measured, and it's within probably a millimeter of being level, wingtip to wingtip, which I think is pretty good because it was probably more like 3 or 4 millimeters off before. I'm getting close to being able to put the cowling and the propeller on. All I have to do is put a backer piece in there. And according to the box top, the propeller should be painted silver, which probably really created a glare effect for the pilot. And of course, mostly just little tiny stuff. Basically, I would need to paint the inside of this door and mount it on. So I should have known, and almost every aircraft modeler knows this. We have a borderline tail sitter here. Although all I have to put in on the tail side is the jet exhausts. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to install a metal weight in the entryway, and then I'm going to scratch build a suitcase or something to sit in front of it, and that should take care of most of our tail sitting issues. So I've got the air stair all painted, and that includes painting the edges of it silver. And I've got my spinny thing ready to go. I can finally install that on the front of the Vega. We're really down to the last couple of things here. So I won't say anything like, ta-da, they're done, because this this finishing up of these two took way longer than what I planned. And it's not because I was working on them every night for hours and hours and hours. Honestly, it was more like, let's work on them for half an hour. Then 3 days later, work on them a little bit again. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of that had to do with problems with the decals. And as a matter of fact, they had the exact opposite problems. The Vega had decals that were virtually indestructible. They were really super strong. They separated almost instantly from the backing. But once you put them on, they didn't want to conform to the model. And then on the other hand, the Falcon, its decals were the exact opposite. Now, I did put microscale decal film solution on it in order to toughen it up. But they definitely took forever to separate from the backing. And when they did, they wanted to fracture. They fractured something serious. So basically one project with two completely different sets of problems with decals. Indestructible, and they didn't want to settle down, and super fragile, but just a quick brush with some setting solution, and they were fine. And of course, these are the same scale, or very close to being the same scale. It wouldn't surprise me if the Vega was maybe something weird like 1/50th scale or 1/46 or something when it was first cut. I'd say the only disappointing thing about the Vega's paint scheme is you don't actually get the Shell logo. It would really have been awesome if they had the actual Shell logo, but it wasn't on the plane as it was operated. And as I mentioned earlier, I ended up using old Caterpillar yellow for the Vega. The original yellow I used was just too bright and too light. This looks a lot warmer. The Falcon just got basic gloss white. So the Falcon was definitely the easier build of the two. The parts just basically clipped together. It wasn't that it was a snap together kit, but as you come to expect with a lot of Japanese kits, everything fit. The only thing that did kind of surprise me was if you look at the landing gear doors, how they sit out at an angle like that, which I believe is the way they actually were. There's no way they could be straight down because they'd foul the ground, and they'd also foul the landing gear themselves. And in flight, it must be like the 737 in that the actual outer wheel isn't covered. It is still a minor tail sitter, but it's not like it's always on the verge of going over. There are a couple rough spots in the decals, especially the nose on this side. You can see there's a little chunk missing there. And I think there's a little chunk missing underneath this engine. Although, if this was probably a 10-year-old private jet, probably would have a couple rough spots on it anyway, even if it was very well maintained. I mean, after all, this is operating out in the real world. The little vents and things on the engines, they just got a bit of panel wash. And same thing on the tail. You can see that there's some vents down there that got some panel wash as well. But it was definitely enjoyable, and I'm looking forward to the next time I do a corporate jet, because I do have another one in my collection. I'm trying to remember what type it is. I know it's a straight wing. But when you put this next to like a 1/48 scale fighter jet, you realize just how small, or maybe a better way of putting it is just how much more efficient use of space something like a small passenger jet is compared to a fighter jet. So giving the Vega center stage, It turns out that we can still see in the cockpit fairly clearly. It doesn't really show on the camera, but you can still look in there and see all the detailing. The pitot tube, I ended up just using a piece of metal rod for that. Because, of course, that was the first thing that broke off while I was working on the model, was the plastic rod that came with it. And what I did is basically where the decals came to the edges of the wings and the tail surfaces, I just touched up that area with red paint. Very, very basic kit. I think maybe half as many parts as the Falcon, although even the Falcon didn't have that many parts. So I'm glad I tackled it. It's nice to have a civilian plane from the 20s and 30s to go with all the military aircraft. So that's the end of my project, Corporate Flyers. Thanks for watching, and until next time, just keep on modeling.